Of D-Day, a lot of veterans are looking back.
And for so many, the memories are still very raw. A Lincoln man was there on the shores of Normandy, and Channel 8 Eyewitness News reporter Pierce Garlett talked to him today. Pierce?
Megan and Rod, Charles Hauptman is a 96-year-old D-Day veteran who lives here in Lincoln. And today I talked with him about the day and what he experienced. What was that day like?
Oh,
For Charles Hauptman, the emotions from D-Day are still real.
I know. Yeah.
The anniversary for the invasion in Normandy was 75 years ago Thursday. Charles Hauptman, a Lincoln native, joined the Navy when he was 16 years old after his neighbor died during Pearl Harbor. Then, after begging his mother to let him fight, she signed off. He soon found himself along the shores during D-Day, helping bring men to the shores.
I remember my biggest problem, I took care of controls of the ship going in and out, and we run over all these soldiers laying in the water and running over them, and that sort of got to you. I mean, they was all dead, I'm sure, but the water was just full of dead people.
Years after the invasion, Charles took his wife and his family back to Normandy to visit Utah Beach. And while the memory of that day is still on the forefront of his mind, he says everything else has changed on those beaches.
It didn't look the same anymore, because it built up now, the houses and everything else. When we was in there, it was just sand.
But now, 75 years later, Charles remembers every detail of that day. And while it changed the world, he and his fellow soldiers had a job to do.
Well, when you're 19, 20 years old, nothing's important. You just do it. It's no big deal. We just done it.
Charles told me his captain was actually from York, Nebraska, and he joked he was just a little bit easier on him because of the Cornhusker connection.
You know what,
Wow.
for Charles to talk to us today, and as we saw there, 75 years later, it is such an emotional thing for him, something we can only wonder what it's like to have that in your mind.
Yeah, for sure.
Pierce, thank you for that story.
Yes, and thank you to him.
Could have been in the Army, but thank God I was in the Navy.
Charlie Hauptman is 96 years old. He enlisted in the Navy right after the attack on Pearl Harbor.
The buddy I run around with out in Havelock, his brother was in the Navy, and Pearl Harbor, he got killed, and it made me mad, and so I went and joined the Navy.
He looks back on his time in the Navy fondly. He told me he was pretty ornery back then.
Because I got pretty drunk a couple times. We come up, went over to England. I was too stupid to know any different.
But it wasn't all fun and games for this young sailor. He was on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day 75 years ago.
The wars are they're bad. Well, the only thing that bothered me was running over the people in the water. They couldn't have. They was face down, most of them, I think.
Charlie's son says he's seen his dad shed tears a few times, but he's only seen him weep once.
That was when he was in Normandy. He says, why am I not here with these guys? And I said, well, somebody has to tell the story.
Charlie says he still thinks about the men who died.
Really, there's nobody around. They're all gone.
And he says he'll never forget that day.
Mom and Dad one time, and she is talking about all the time. She makes pictures, sends them letters, and always, when can I go see Grandma? When am I big enough to go see her?
You got nothing to do,
And what was your job?
He wasn't too good at the officer.
No?
Yeah.
Finish the story, Jack.
He just,
Jack, finish that story about your captain.
what?
Finish the story about your captain.
We'll go on if there's more.
I just told him I'd sit on him.
Oh.
No, I heard about the sitting on a bed. I thought there was more coming out of this. This is going to be
He was
good.
outside there running. I grabbed him, yanked him in, and he,
And he sat on it.
before
And this
we
was
were-
in England.
That was in England, yeah. That was for the invasion.
Yeah.
So the American shell?
No, a German.
Oh, something they dropped bombs there.
Yeah, but it went through the ceiling, the roof, you know, and went through the floor, and it stuck there, and didn't go off.
Didn't explode.
And you thought, why tempt fate? I'm out of here.
Yeah.
8-9 miles before Utah Beach, north of Utah Beach.
Yeah.
I'm now driving out directly due east to the shoreline itself, and I'm going to drive you down about the last 7 miles from here to Utah Beach, where you would have landed on D-Day.
Yeah. Going to tell us how the cases were marked, and they said, no, we want a case of that whiskey. So when we lower it down, we want you to tie it to the line and drag it around and bring it back up. But we sat there, and the next morning they decided to bring him into town here and unload at the docks after. And so we quit hauling stuff in then after that.
What, after the Admiral's whiskey started disappearing?
We didn't get to unload it.
Ah!
No, the ship went into the town.
The harbor.
In the harbor. Where the wartime money.
Yeah.
A military script.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what we had in Korea when we
Did
first
you?
over there. Yeah. Because there was a black market in the dollars.
Yeah.
Well, of course, there was a black market in everything, but of course, you didn't black market anything, did you, Dad? Dad?
Huh?
You weren't
Did you do
involved
any
in,
black marketing?
You didn't do any black marketing, right?
No, I didn't. No.
You didn't happen to sell any sort of 5-gallon cans of gas, you know?
There was a captain that's going to hang at that place where we was in jail the next morning for selling gas. And he sold a Jeep, too. And they kind of got mad at him, so they hung him the next morning.
So the story goes.
That's what they said. I don't know. I didn't see him, didn't meet him, and I didn't care. I wanted to get out of there.
The scared straight.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, they're going to hang about 6 to 8 guys that morning for different reasons. Spies, a bunch of different stuff. All we want to do is get out of there.
Oh, yeah.
No, I didn't even see this stuff. I didn't even get in that far. Except when we drove the convoy.
Yeah. There's no little villages down opposite where you were landing. There is on Omaha.
No,
You're on
a farmhouse. There's a farmhouse. Off a little ways from the beach.
You're talking about a little place that should have been in front of you and off to your left when you landed.
The farmhouse?
Well, it's a little chapel.
Oh, no, I didn't see that. I don't think.
Well, I'll show it to you because it looks rather like the farmhouse if you see it from the distance. And that was what told Teddy Roosevelt Jr. that you were in the wrong place because of this high stone wall you've got here on your left-hand side. The landing's meant to be taking place a little bit further down the way here.
Yeah.
But this bit of the beach here is almost unchanged.
These buildings and stuff were here then?
No, well, some of them were. Generally speaking, these really square-looking ones, which look like rabbit hutches, you can be pretty sure these weren't here. The original buildings would have been stone. This is one of the gun bunkers here on your left, which would have been shooting at you on D-Day.
Yeah.
This is a German 75mm field artillery piece, which would have been shooting down at you, coming in from your right-hand side as you were coming into the beach. You can see the Ile Saint-Marcouf off to your left there. They'd have been about half a mile off to your right. You'd have been coming in down somewhere around where this guy, these first little clumps of sticks are sticking up in the air. That should have been the very northernmost sector of the landings on Utah Beach on D-Day. But you guys landed way too far to the south. There's more German bunkers here on your right. That was only off Omaha.
Yeah, that's on Omaha.
I think you'd quite enjoy the Omaha Beach Museum from the point of view of the Navy. But we'll have a look and see what it's like when we get down there.
got a hold of you guys, well, John originally.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not. He's not the right same one.
No, I have a little minion replacement.
Back in, I don't know, January when we
Would have
started
been
talking
about
about
January,
this.
yeah. Have a look here on your left, guys. This is the memorial to the people who actually won World War II all on their own without any help from anyone else, because this is where the 2nd Free French Armoured Division landed, just here.
Yeah.
And so the French have put up a little memorial just to remind you that they won World War II all on their own without any help from anyone else.
That thing brand new, never used.
Brand new, never used, only had one white flag raised on the top.
Have many weapons, I'm sure, never used, laid down
Yeah,
once.
oh well, you know, it's like the Arvin rifles. Your brother would tell you, get them in Vietnam, never fired, only dropped once. Brand new M16. You were in Vietnam, I believe. I heard you talking about your comp.
Is this a bunker here?
I'm pretty sure.
Right in here?
Within 200-300 yards of this spot here is where I've worked out that you were washed ashore. Now, you need to go and pee, so we're going to come back here later on.
Yeah.
But we're going to go down the way for a bit, down to...
I don't remember the rocks out in the water, though.
No. Well, they weren't. This, I'm going to tell you, there's quite a lot changed here. You can see these dunes here in front of you. This was originally as flat as the beach is further up the way. It's just that nowadays the French have built up all the sand dunes. So all the bunkers you can see here in front of you, which are now almost completely buried, would have been fully exposed in 1944. And unfortunately, if you see this first bunker here, you can see what appears to be a little concrete gopher hole on the up here on your left-hand side. Again, you can see there's another little bit of concrete sticking out the top up there.
Yeah.
And there's another bunker, and it's buried under there as well. And this is unfortunately what I was telling you, that Utah Beach has changed almost completely from what it was in 1944, because all of these sand dunes here on your left-hand side have been built up since then. Mostly to try and prevent coastal erosion, but it also means that most of the gun bunkers and stuff, which would have been shooting at you in 1944, are now buried. Now, we're going to go up in here. Guys, listen up for 2 seconds, please.
Listen up.
We're going up in here into the cafe, and I have had a request for somebody to go and take a pee, which is no problem. Trouble is, in France, you can't just walk in and use somebody's toilets. You've got to buy something to drink. Now, that doesn't mean you've all got to buy something to drink, but if you all want to pee, at least half of you are going to have to buy something to drink, or they're going to get all snotty. Now, I'll do my bit and take one for the team and have a cup of coffee. But if you guys, somebody's got to buy something. Otherwise, you'd be peeing up against the back of a bunker.
Kind of like the guy back at the port. He didn't have nothing.
That's the key to the door. It went shut.
For sure. The key.
Yes. Là. Je te. Thank you. There you go, Joe. Là. C'est tout?
Ah oui, bien sûr. Hey, your pops gets to sign a wall. Nobody signs bar in here unless you're actually a veteran. Your pop, your rank, the first date you landed, and what you were doing. So you were going to put down U.S. Navy, Charles, and LCM 580, landed Utah, even if you got about the time you landed as well. Find a spot where there's nobody written down and start writing. Hang on a second. He wants to get a photo of you writing it on the wall. Got to practice throwing that cane and make sure you can get him from 20 yards. Have a little look. You can see there's a lump of concrete which starts about here and it runs across to about here. You can see from where you guys are standing that it's about at your eye height. This is about 2.5 feet thick because this is the remains of the German anti-tank wall. Now the anti-tank wall extended the whole way up, both sides of Cherbourg Peninsula and across the top. The fact that this anti-tank wall is now buried under 15 feet of sand will tell you quite simply that these sand dunes weren't actually here in 1944. The path that you're standing on at the moment is the approximate level of the beach as it would have been when the Allies landed on the morning of June 6th in 1944. Now, people normally think that this is wind or erosion. It's not. It's quite simply the fact that it's very flat inland. You're only about 3 or 4 feet above sea level inland from here. You get big storm surges coming in the winter and it could flood the whole area inland. So they built up all these sand dunes in the 1950s to protect the inland areas from coastal flooding. Now, they didn't bury the German bunkers because they're German bunkers. They quite simply buried the German bunkers because they're in the way. And unfortunately, this basically means that the beach, as you knew it back then, looks nothing like what it does now, and is very, very much more closed in. If you stand over here, and you look down this way, you want to just stand on this side over here because you are now looking in the direction that this picture was taken. And this is the 50mm anti-tank gun, which is up on the top of the bunkers here, about 80 meters behind you. We're going to go and have a look at it in a minute. We're standing at the moment just about where this guy is right here. But you can see the beaches. There were little sand dunes here, but they're about 3 to 5 feet high. That's it. You didn't have these big 20-foot high sand dunes that you've got today. And this is just to give you an idea that the beach in 1944 was much, much more open than it is today. And unfortunately, there isn't really very much I can show you about the bunkers and the defenses here on Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, primarily because they're all buried. But nothing sort of done to piss you guys off. But come down here, and I'm going to tell you the story of what happened and why your dad and his buddies made a complete mess of the landings on D-Day. But I actually turned out to be very, very lucky. I'm going to go down to this one just.
Okay.
Up the top, just up here, please. Hey, you want a photograph to take? Look, a Frenchman actually doing some work. Do you realize how rare the opportunity for a photograph like that actually is?
I bet you're married to a French girl.
No, my girlfriend's German.
Oh.
Actually, this will still be here.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But see how flat it is. I mean, see how...
That's the bunker you were looking for.
And we had it right down to beyond it then.
Yeah.
And it was on my right.
Yeah, that would have been the bunker you're talking about then. Righty guys, come over here and have a look at my map. Line yourselves up just along the top here. Doug, you'd be better off over here. We'll move down here in a minute. Now, this is my Rembrandt-like map of Normandy. Cherbourg, where I picked you guys up, is up here. Utah Beach, where you are at the moment, is just about here. Sainte-Mère-Église, which is where the paratroopers are coming in, is about 6 miles inland behind you. It's just about here. If you look through the mist on the far side, you can see cliffs over there on the other side. That is Pointe du Hoc, which is just here. Beyond Pointe du Hoc, you've got Omaha Beach, which is just here. You've got Bayou down here. And then you've got Gold and Juno and Sword. And we're not interested in them.
Germans are shooting at us from there.
Exactly. Precisely. You got it right on the money. One last place, Carenton down here. Carenton's very important. 7 major rivers coming in through Carenton. This whole area here was a major river estuary. Now, the Allies landed at low tide on D-Day. Do you know why you had to land at low tide? The Navy wanted to land at high tide.
I don't know why.
Because of all the obstacles the Germans had put on the beaches.
Oh, they
The
were
first
right there.
guys, exactly, first guys to land on the beaches were the infantry, but right behind them, about most of the second assault wave which landed was actually assault engineers. They came ashore, their job was to do nothing more than blow up all the obstacles the Germans had put here on the beach. Now the reason for this was that it was expected if the Allies landed when the tide was fully in, the Allies would stand to lose up to 80% of their assault craft in the first assault wave. And this was considered too high a price to pay. With the tide fully out, all the obstacles the Germans put on the beach were on the open sand. So the infantry could land, they could assault the beach itself, and then, after the infantry have passed through the beach, the engineers blow up all the obstacles. The tetrahedra, they were called, the Czech hedgehogs. Trouble is, tide was fully out. By definition, with the tide fully out, it's starting to come in. And on a rising tide, the current comes over the top of the Cherbourg Peninsula, runs down like this, hits off Omaha Beach, and runs off here to the east like that. Now, the current on this tide is about 4.7 knots. I'm no sailor, but any sailor who is will tell you that is one hell of a current. It is faster than walking pace and faster than most large rivers flow, believe it or not. The wind on D-Day was northwesterly, blowing from this direction up here, blowing down across the beaches like this. Now, standing on Utah Beach, looking out to sea, everything is effectively being blown from north to south or left to right. Standing on Omaha Beach, everything is still effectively going from left to right, but in this case it's going from west to east. But it's the same overall net effect. Now, I'm going to draw you another map of just this little bit right here, but much, much bigger, just down here. If you guys want to line yourselves up over here, line along here, and these are the roads running inland, which was supposed to be in the sector being assaulted by the 4th U.S. Infantry Division, you guys bringing them ashore on D-Day. Now, we were just up a little minute ago at exit 3, which is the very first place we came out into the beach, and I said, I'm pretty sure this is where you got stranded. Yeah. And if you remember, I showed you, sticking out of all the sand dunes, there is loads and loads of bunkers up there. It is a very, very strongly reinforced section of the beach. We didn't see exit 4, but you can take my word for it, it's the same sort of thing. An awful lot of very, very strong bunkers at the end of the exit. About halfway between the two, you've got Stützpunkt 9. It's another very, very strong German position. Here, all you've got is one 75mm anti-tank gun off here to your left, one 50mm anti-tank gun off here to your right, and 3 forward-facing machine guns. It was also underneath the museum. Another artillery observation position. German artillery are further inland, they're firing down onto the beach. The guy up here in the museum is built on top of the beach. He's looking at these shots, and the shots are cold. It's calling on the radio, your shots are 200 yards short and 100 yards to the right. And the guy back in the artillery piece adjusts the gun and fires the second shot. And then the guy with the telephone tells him what's going on. But relatively speaking, there's virtually no defenses here at all. Now, on D-Day, this is exit 2 running straight inland here. Exit 1 also comes ashore here, and the road runs down the coast about 2/3 of a mile, and then it runs inland. Now, on D-Day, the US Army asked the US Navy if they would bring the troops in opposite exits 1 and 2. And the Navy came along and they took one look at the beach and they said, no chance, not going to happen. We're going to bring you guys in between exits 3 and exits 4. Now the problem is that here in Normandy, the tide is huge. The tide is coming in off the Atlantic and it's moving up the English Channel, which is a channel not only getting ever and ever narrower the further up it you go, but also ever and ever shallower the further up you go. So as the tide moves up, it starts to pile up on top of itself. By the time you are landing here in Normandy, you are looking at the tide rising and falling between 19 and 22 feet vertically every time it goes in and goes out. Now this is just considered to be absolutely massive. It's one of the second highest tides anywhere in the world. And the US Navy said, we'll drop you off here because when the tide goes out further up here opposite exits 3 and 4, it'll expose about 500 yards of sand. The trouble is, the further south you go, the closer you get to Carentan, which is down here. And the further out the tide goes, because the more into the river estuary you are moving, and the further up any river estuary you go, the more it gets shallow from all the silt which is deposited. So as the tide goes out about 500 yards further up the coast, down here it actually goes out closer to 1,100 yards when the tide is fully out. If you see those poles sticking out of the water offshore, when the tide is fully out, it is actually over about 200 meters, the other side of the furthest one of those poles, just to give you an idea as to how absolutely massive the tidal draw is here. Yeah. Now the US Navy said, we can't land you down here because it's way too shallow. Nobody is going to land down there. The Germans will have a field day. We'll drop you off opposite exits 3 and 4. You can fight your way inland from there. There's a little road running down the back of the beach here. We drove down the road to get down here. You can use this road and you can fight your way south and you can open up exits 1 and 2 like that. And the US Army came along and went, but hey, tough nibs, what can you do? On D-Day, the 4th Division was floating around out here offshore, meant to be being brought into the beach, but it had problems. The 4th Division was meant to be being led by 2 Navy patrol boats, came over from England to guide them into the beach. These are the guys in charge of the navigation. And they had to leave one of the patrol boats behind in England because it fouled its propeller on a lobster pot rope as it was leaving Portsmouth. This second one was doing a grand job of bringing them into the beach on the morning of June 6th, and at about 4:30 in the morning it ran over a mine on the sandbank of Les Grandes Baies about 5 miles offshore. The patrol boat blew up and it sank. What does the Army know about boats?
Very little.
Absolutely bugger all. You need the Navy for that. So they rang up the Navy and they said, how's it going? We're the 4th Division Invasion Fleet and we're meant to be going in to attack the beach, but we've sort of lost our patrol boat. Well, we actually lost both of them. So we'd really rather like it if you could send us another one. And the Navy said, no problem. It'll be along in a little wee minute. But have a look at the coastline. You will see, no matter what direction you look, there are no promontories, there's no headlands, there's no landmarks, there's nothing here to tell you where the hell you actually are in relation to what's on the coastline. You also got to remember, it's 4:30 in the morning. It's dark. Yeah. The Navy and the Air Force actually managed to hit Utah Beach because they missed Omaha by a factor of nearly 3 miles. That's another story for this afternoon. Suffice it to say, the whole beach here is covered in dust and fog and smoke and everything else. And it's dark. So these guys didn't really know what was going on. 45 minutes later, the new patrol boat arrived as they said it was, all grand and hunky-dory, and brought the troops into the beach. But because the new patrol boat couldn't actually see the beach and couldn't get any landmarks to work out where it was, they just assumed that the 4th Division Invasion Fleet had been left in the right place by the previous assault boat before it had blown up, which it had. They didn't realize that in the intervening 45 minutes between the first patrol boat blowing up and the second patrol boat arriving, that these guys had drifted over for 1.5 miles south of the current. There was another problem as well, is that a US destroyer called the Carney had been sunk just to the north of the fleet as they were coming in, and with the Corrie sinking, they were diverting slightly left as they were coming into the shore to make sure they missed the wreckage as well. All of these things combined together meant that on D-Day, the 4th Division ended in coming in and landing on the beach right here where you are now, at the spot where the US Army had initially asked the US Navy to drop the troops off, at the spot on the beach where the US Navy had initially said you can't land there because it's too shallow, at the spot on the beach where the Germans had said there's no point in building any bunkers here, it's way too shallow for a landing, nobody's going to be stupid enough to land here, they're all going to land further up north. With the result that when you came ashore on D-Day on the morning of June 6th, the 4th US Infantry Division suffered only 24 men killed and 50 wounded, crossing this massive open beach and assaulting these German bunker complexes just inland from here. Now, you do not need to be a military genius to work out that attacking German defensive positions from behind is going to be a hell of a lot easier than it is to attack them from the front. So, after having secured this initial landing spot on the beach, by going 100 yards inland, you were through the vaunted Atlantic Wall. Now, the Atlantic Wall, as it was envisaged by Hitler's planners initially, was meant to be 3 lines of defences. One on the coast, a second line of defences 6 miles inland behind the first line, and a third line of defences, another 6 miles inland behind the second line. The defences were meant to be up to 15 miles deep. Here in Normandy, the Germans had only actually managed to build about half of all the bunkers they actually wanted to build in the first line of defence. They hadn't even started the second or third line of defence. So once you had got past these sand dunes and gone 100 yards inland, you were through these vaunted Atlantic Wall defences. And this meant, by the simple expedient of skipping up the coast and coming in to take these positions from behind, a bit like something you'd want to watch out for when you were in the brig, meant that by nightfall on D-Day, the 22nd Regiment of the 4th Division had cleaned out 6 miles of German bunker complexes running north, and the 8th Regiment had cleaned out 3.5 miles running south. Now, the Germans did not have one bunker every couple of 100 yards along the shore, which is what most people seem to think it was. The Germans had a cluster of bunkers. Each cluster of bunkers was separated from the next cluster of bunkers on either side of it by about 1,100 yards or about 1,000 meters. Now, the idea was each bunker in each cluster would mutually overlap and support each other bunker in the cluster. Each cluster of bunkers would mutually overlap and support the next 2 clusters of bunkers down to the north and south or east and west of them. So that while you would not have a single continuous belt of defences, what you would have is these guys here covering this section of the beach like this, these guys here covering it like this, these guys here covering it like this, down like this, and all overlapping so that the entire beach would have been covered. Now, the good thing from your point of view is that not only had they not finished the Atlantic Wall here, but they had 1 battalion of soldiers, that's 800 guys, guarding 10 miles of coastline here where the landings took place. That is only 80 German soldiers per mile of defences on the coast. And with about 1.5 bunker complexes every mile, you're looking at something in the region of only about 50 guys available for each bunker complex. Now, you may well go, oh, 50 guys, that's loads. Yeah, 50 guys if they're all there at the same time, but they're not. You have one bunch of guys who are on duty, another bunch of guys who are on reserve duty, and a third bunch of guys who are doing nothing. So you're never going to have more than an absolute maximum of 2/3 of those troops in these bunkers at any one time. So you're only looking at something in the region of 20 to 30 Germans in each one of these bunker clusters here on the beach. Now, on Omaha Beach, the guy who was in charge there had been given much better German soldiers to look after the beach. He'd also been given an awful lot more of them. The Allies really didn't think anybody was going to land here because there really isn't anything of any great strategic or tactical military value beyond the beach here. The Germans didn't quite realize that the only thing the Allies were looking for coming ashore here in Normandy was nothing of any great strategic or tactical value inland beyond saying, we're here and we're in France, and from this point we can now attack towards these strategic and tactically important areas. Because one of the reasons the Allies landed in Normandy is primarily because there is absolutely nothing here. Normandy is the French equivalent of those parts of the United States where you stand a better than 50% chance of ending up marrying one of your own cousins. Something along the lines of West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee sort of area. But this really is the absolute arse end of nowhere when it comes to France, which is why I wouldn't blame you in the slightest for taking the earliest possible opportunity to pinch one of Uncle Sam's Jeeps and head straight for Paris, because there is absolutely bugger all to do here in Normandy, even today.
There was a farmhouse and up a road and over, and it's probably over here somewhere, because we went up on the bunker, if that's the one.
Yeah.
Beyond that, where we went ashore.
Yeah.
And there's a road there.
We'll take a drive down the coast then in a minute if you want.
Yeah.
No problem.
And and there's a wooden farmhouse and a barn and some other stuff. There was.
You guys probably blew it up after.
No.
Ramsack to see if there's any wine in it, probably.
Well, we found the other stuff that was.
The other stuff? What was that other stuff?
Wine cellars and things, apple cider. Just something to drink. We was thirsty.
Yeah.
We needed a beer.
Not in France.
Not in France.
No, beer, wine in France. Wine, peasant, wine. Control, the officer on the right, giving it loads of this, giving out people, generally not knowing what the hell's going on, but he's meant to be the command guy. You got the other guy on the left here, he's just about to shove the shell into the gun. He's the fire control, and these are the guys who are supporting the troops landing on the beach. There's another guy just around the side here, and this guy is actually dressed up far more like a general infantryman than a Navy guy. And that's because this guy is one of the NCDUs, which is the Naval Combat Demolition Unit. And these are the guys about to blow up all the obstacles on the beach on D-Day. Exactly. 1945, these guys turned into the underwater demolition teams. Late 1950s, they turned into the US Navy SEALs. But these are the guys who are represented by this. Now, you do have quite a lot of the LSTs, which are bringing the troops into the beach. But that's the smallest the ships goes mentioned on this. Apparently, you came over on LST 44, was it?
Yeah.
Should be round here on the right-hand side.
But then they had the
Yeah. No. These are as small as they go. I don't think they have the LST. LST. Point to the right one.
No, point to the
Point to it.
LST 44.
Yeah. There you go. He's standing literally right in front of just where Chuck is standing now. But you can see behind it just exactly how wide open the beach is. What I was telling you about the sand dunes just not being here in 1944. You were saying about the bunkers downstairs where they were living in. You're standing on top of another one here. We're going to go down the back here. We're going to have a little look.
No.
Come on, Granny. Good stuff.
They captured it June 6th.
Huh?
They captured it June 6th.
Yeah, that's on the D-Day.
Yeah, that's when this got captured.
They probably burned them out. Is it open?
No.
Maybe he has a key to get in
I
there.
doubt it.
I doubt it.
You sure it's not open?
Yeah, it's locked.
How do they lock it?
With a key.
Oh. Probably open during over.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah. Oh, he's coming around.
We want bullets. You guys are bringing in artillery shells. They bring up the Navy and they say we need bullets, not artillery shells. And this is where it was all coordinated from. Now you can see that some of the equipment is German, such as this telephone up here and these bunk beds which were swung down from the roof. But this is all American equipment. The Germans, all the German equipment was pulled out and the Americans replaced it with American radio equipment. But the Germans are very well disciplined soldiers who always do what they're told and don't do the wrong thing. Unlike the Americans, of course, who are incredibly undisciplined. So whereas there is no German graffiti on the wall, there is an awful lot of American graffiti on the wall. Such as these guys here. Various different guys signed the wall, giving you the date they came ashore, when they went home, and when these guys came back, because they'd signed the wall in 1944, and this is 6 of the team that used to work in here, Frank, who's the guy who owns the bar, got him to sign it again. And you can see one of the guys here is just signing up the top here, when they came back in 2001. They're getting the veterans to sign the bar again, which I thought you might find quite interesting to have a little look at. But this is just to give you a little bit of a 1944 view of what was going on back then. Granny, of course, I'm sure you can't tell us who any of these young beauties are.
No?
Rita Hayworth?
Oh, yes,
Yes,
of course.
this one up here?
Oh,
The $1 Million Legs?
Yeah.
Betty Grable?
Marilyn Monroe?
No, Betty Grable, Marilyn
Oh,
Monroe's
Betty
only a
Grable.
twinkle in the
Oh,
eye.
you're
of
right.
Hollywood.
I remember,
Yeah.
You're right.
The prisoners they brought down.
Yep. You would have been shipping them back to England.
On my
Yeah.
boat.
Did you get yourself a German helmet?
No, but there was one guy had a beautiful pair of boots.
Yeah.
He was a big guy, and I asked him for them, and he said no, and I thought, well, I'm not going to argue with him.
He was a German. You got a gun.
I know. They shot some. We didn't do that.
Shot the prisoners, Dad?
Huh?
They shot some of the prisoners?
No.
Wow.
Not like they did ours, but
Well, yeah, true.
He's having a
this
lunch.
guy had a beautiful pair of black boots.
Yeah. Was he an officer?
Huh?
Was he an officer?
No, he wasn't.
If he was enlisted, I'd have left him with him. If he was an officer, I'd have stripped him down to his underwear.
There was a doctor,
Yeah.
probably an officer,
Yeah.
and he could speak English.
Yeah.
And he told me that he had no choice, because if you was German, you had to fight.
Yeah.
But he said the only satisfaction he had, he was a doctor. And he could try to save people instead of killing them. And we visited quite a while, and then we took him over to England and got rid of him over there. But he was a pretty nice guy. He said he hadn't seen his family for 2 years, his wife and 2 kids. But he said when they said you was in the army, you're in the army, no matter who you are, you had to fight.
Didn't have any choice in England or in Germany.
Yeah, he was real nice. But that other guy was he was kind of nasty. And I didn't want to tangle up with him because he was
What happened to Doug?
he was
He's
big.
out there. I don't think he could get up out of here.
Do you see these 3 guys here?
Yeah.
These 3 soldiers here, they're sitting down just here in front of the wall here. And you've got the windows painted onto the back of the bunker. This, your dad was saying, where's he gone?
He's coming.
You were saying this building wasn't here in 1944. Well, here it is. This is the building just in front of it. They put an extra story onto it now. It's now 2 stories high instead of just 1. You can still see the original bullet holes in the back of the wall here, though, and where the Germans had to brick up the window at the back of the house. You can also see the Jeep over here, and what don't you see behind the Jeep? The sand dunes, which I was telling you about. But I got your daughter to buy you this. She said you use the computer. It's a little mouse pad for your computer mouse.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's 3 of your boys around the cemetery.
I love how the Europeans hang on to their old landmarks. So many times in America they tear them down and build something new.
They're a little bit older here than you get in America. When you think about it, pulling down a house which is 100 years old, it's not that old really. But pulling down a church which is 1,000 years old, that's pushing it a bit. But I mean, I bought a house 3 years ago, and my house cost 150,000 euros. It was built in about 1750. Another friend of mine bought another, and we are going to pop in and have a little look in the cemetery. After that, we're going to go down. At the very least, we'll have a little drive along Omaha Beach. But hopefully, you should have enough time to take a look at it. We're going to get you some lunch as well. Right, you guys.
We can go back down here to the cemetery, 'cause I think he's going to take us back down to which way the graves go, though.
This is a good intro.
There you go. Huh?
Special honors or something.
I don't know.
Get some pictures.
Because they go, yeah, but it's all wrong. The gun isn't pointing out to sea. No, it's not. Virtually none of the guns on any of the beaches were actually pointing out to sea. This is all Steven Spielberg, Hollywood, and all this kind of type of crap. If you have your guns pointing straight out to sea, the aperture, the hole in the front of your gun that you're trying to stick your gun out of, is pointing straight towards you guys who are trying to fire bullets and artillery shells straight in through the front of it. When you land on the beach, though, if you have this wall here to protect your aperture and the wall of the bunker itself, and these walls are 6.5 feet thick, solid steel reinforced concrete. Any fire which is coming from the beach is going to be hitting off the concrete. Happy days. The guys land on the beach, and you are actually shooting down the length of the beach, not straight out to sea. This is something which nobody seems to realize. The whole bit in Saving Private Ryan, where the Germans land on the beach, the ramp comes down, the Germans are up here, they're shooting straight into the landing craft. It's brilliant Hollywood. It is total crap. You are blocked from actually pointing your machine guns out to sea. But I wanted to show you this little bunker here. If you have a look at this bit here, you can see in this photograph, this is some of your boys shortly after D-Day. You got these guys, they're sitting around just here behind me. Again, you can see the white blobs on the photograph from where the sensor has removed part of the pictures, because this picture had militarily sensitive information on it before it was actually, when it was released to the public. And you can see the bunker here behind us. You can also see here behind the bunker how much more open the shoreline itself actually was. None of these trees were here. None of these bushes here on the other side of the road, and most of these houses weren't here either. Now, on the morning of June 6th, at about 8 o'clock in the morning, about an hour and a half after the landings had started, elements of the 467th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Unit were landing on the beach here. The Americans, the British, and the Canadians were very worried the Allies would start landing on the beach, and suddenly the Luftwaffe would send all their airplanes over from Germany. They'd come in, they'd bomb the beaches, they'd shoot the knackers out of the place. They wanted anti-aircraft defences on the beach very, very early. First two half-tracks to come off the LCT, bringing these guys to the shore, were knocked out by an anti-tank gun on shore. Nobody could quite work out where it was. You've got to remember, these bunkers are all camouflaged on D-Day. Third half-track came off the landing craft. The M3 half-track was driven by a guy under the command of a guy called Sergeant Haas. Now, as soon as the first two half-tracks in front of him were hit and blew up, he immediately ordered his driver to reverse the half-track into the sea. Now, all the vehicles which landed on D-Day were waterproofed. They had air intakes and exhaust pipes above the driver's cab. Technically, the driver would have actually drowned before the engine of his vehicle actually cut out, which will give you an idea as to how good it was. But he immediately ordered his driver to reverse the half-track into the sea, which the guy did. The guy sitting in the driver's cab was sitting in water coming up to about his neck. He had to close both of the window flaps on either side of the cab of the half-track, stop the waves washing through and drowning him. Now, to the Germans up here on the beach, it just looked like any other swamped vehicle. Nobody was paying it any attention. Sergeant Haas was standing on the back and he was looking around, and he eventually identified this bunker here as the main source of the problems. Now, the only thing on the back of the half-track, which was actually sticking out of the water, was the 37mm anti-aircraft cannon that the Americans carried as their medium anti-aircraft artillery. He swung the gun around and immediately fired a burst at this bunker here. Now, the trouble was, the standard range for setting our sights going into combat for an anti-aircraft gun was about 2,500 feet if you're trying to defend against low-flying aircraft coming in to attack the beaches. It's a good average to set your heights to. It's a little over 800 yards. Trouble is, Sergeant Haas was only 500 yards away. So when he fired his first spray of shots in the bunker, they hit high. You got one shot hit up here, you got 2 or 3 more hit on the right-hand side of the bunker. Sergeant Haas, luckily for him, realized his mistake before the guy in the bunker was able to react. He adjusted his sights and fired his next shot, one of which came in right through here. You can almost measure the caliber of the shot itself. From the size of the hole, it's drilled in the steel I-beam. But come around the back of the bunker, because this is where it only gets really interesting. Side.
Do we want to?
Oh, you do, Granny. You'd love to see this. I know your fella wants to see it anyway.
I know. Let him go. He'd be right in there.
I can see that. No problem. Squash in over on the left if you can a little bit. I'm going to show you the stuff in here on the right. Now, this is the German KWK 39 50mm anti-tank gun. Doug, get your ass in here.
It's coming. It's right behind me.
Come in here so I can show you this stuff. You're going to want to actually be in the bunker. You won't be able to see it. Now, in 1944, there was a seat coming up just here. The seat was about here. This is the mount here for the gun sight. So the guy firing the gun would have been sitting down here. You've got a little handle just here, makes the gun go left and right. You have another little handle over here, makes the gun go up and down. He's looking through the sight here, going through this little square hole in the gun shield to aim it at the guys on the beach. Now, the trouble is, when Sergeant Haas's shot hit the bunker, the gun, which is now pointing right, was originally pointing left. So where you've got the armor plate on the left-hand side, right up against the left-hand side of the bunker there, this sheet of armor plate would have been up against the bunker wall about over here where my arm is. So with the shot hitting off here, it has started to glance downwards. With this over here, it has punched straight through the front of the armor plate and broken all the armor plate off. It's then hit the guy who's firing this gun just about right smack here between the eyes, and then continued on and come out the back of his head. Because an armor-piercing shot in 1944 is nothing more than a really big case-hardened tungsten steel bullet. There's virtually no explosive power in it at all. But after it's taken this Heine's head off, it's then hit off the wall here and made this large dint in the wall. Now, hitting off the wall here, it's ricocheting. You would expect it to see more marks on the back wall of the bunker here, but there isn't any. If you have a look here,
Right
though,
over there.
you can see it's hit the back door of the bunker. The bunker latch here has broken off the concrete, which is holding the door closed. It's gone straight on through. By this stage, it is doing what is called keyholing, where it's tumbling end over end. It's come out here, and it's hit smacked off the wall here. Now, people could look at this and they go, yeah, but the gun itself, you could still fire it. Very true, you could, but you can't aim it. And for this point, this gun is largely immobilized. It's largely broken and can be considered to be knocked out. You could bore sight the gun, basically where you got some guy standing behind it like this, looking through the barrel of the gun till it lines up with whatever you want to shoot at. You put a round into the gun, and then you fire. But it's not going to do anything more than give you a very rough idea of what's going on. But another little picture here is to show you, is this one here. Because if you look at this one here, it's taken from just about where you are, Doug. You can see the broken piece of the armor plate here, which is this piece up here. You can see the little seat I was telling you about just here. The open aperture in the front of the gun. You can even see the hole in the wall where this guy's head got taken off. You see the back of the gun here, but you can also see on the box here, US, just placed here behind the gun, that this bunker is very firmly in the hands of the American forces who had captured it. If you have a look on the...
Who loads this gun? He don't load it.
No, he's the firer. You'd have had a loader, he'd been standing behind him on the other right-hand side over here. You'd have had a commander, he's the guy with the binoculars giving it loads of this, telling everybody what to do. You'd have had a fourth and probably fifth guy as well, bringing in ammunition, spotting targets and stuff like that. But all this guy does is he fires the gun. He doesn't actually load it or anything else like that. If you have a look on the base of the gun here, and it's a bit difficult, especially with me standing in the light, you can just about make out here 1941, which is the year of manufacture of the gun itself, and just over here R6036 is the serial number of the gun as well when it was made. There's a couple other pictures I'm going to show you outside when you're ready, but if you want to have a little snoop around in the bunker, if you go head out and turn right when you're floating up in the sky, and you can see one of the barrage balloons here. All the large ships which came over from England, anything bigger than an LCT, if I'm not mistaken, you would have had one of these on top of yours, didn't you?
No.
You didn't? It was the LSTs that definitely had barrage balloons attached to them. These are basically just nothing more than a very large hydrogen-filled balloon. It's floated about 2,500 feet up in the air on a steel cable. You get low-flying planes coming in to attack the ships or anything on shore. You hit your wings off one of these cables, you're going to crash. It's a very, very primitive method of defense, but it is, unfortunately, very, very
well, over
effective.
Over in England, that sky was full of
The
them
whole,
all the time.
exactly. All the major towns were absolutely covered in the barrage balloons, which they were saying. Eisenhower said he reckoned the only thing that was holding England from stopping it from sinking into the seas was the number of barrage balloons attached to it. Have a look at this here, guys. You guys laying carpet tiles. Here you go. Here's your bunker just behind you. You can see the little hole just above the aperture. What does PW mean?
Prisoner of war.
Prisoner of war. Why are there a bunch of heinies cleaning up in front of a German bunker? Why would you want to clean up in front of a German bunker?
They were told to, the Americans.
Yeah, I know, but why would the Americans want the Germans to clean up in front of a bunker? Why do they care? Why would anybody care? Why would you normally clean up something that nobody cares about? Because...
Oh, General's coming.
somebody very important is coming to visit. There you go, General Eisenhower, Hap Arnold as well. This is him. He came ashore just down here off in front of you to your right. Ah, you're full of it. That picture could have been taken anywhere. Very true. But here's another picture of him. He's in his little DUKW there, and there is the bunker right behind you, just here. And this is Eisenhower. He came ashore here on 12th of June 1944. Have a little look around. And this is where he came ashore and where he went off again. Again, you can see very, very few bushes. Even on the bluffs running up the back here, you don't have any of the bushes or the heavy undergrowth you get, which you can see today here on the beach. But one other little thing to show you is this is a very famous photograph of some of the troops landing on D-Day +1. And you can see that there's another picture of it just here, but my picture is much better because I'm a brilliant tour guide, terribly modest as well. You can see these guys marching up the shoulder of a hill just here. You can see the badge on their shoulder here. It looks rather like a medieval shield with a little fins. These guys are marching up this hill here, and this photographer is standing just off here to your right-hand side behind you in the bushes at the top of the hill, taking the photograph looking down this way. And again, you can see here behind you, very, very few trees, bushes, houses, or anything else like that. Just giving you a little bit of an idea as to what the beach looked like in 1944. If you have a look at the map down here, you can see we're just here, right in the middle of Easy Red Sector. The US Cemetery, where you were a minute ago, is just up here on the opposite side of the shoulder of exit Easy 1 behind you here on the left. We're going to drive from here down along the entire western half of the beach, about 2 miles of shoreline, down to the very, very western end to exit Dog 1, where we're going to head off inland off the beach. All right, I'm going to show you a few things. I'm going to tell you a little bit of stuff, but we're not really going to have much time to stop and look. We will have time to go down and get you some sand off the beach. You can see that as I'm driving you along the last 2 miles of Omaha Beach, that Omaha is dominated along almost its entire length by these high sandy bluffs, which run up between 80 and 110 feet off to your left. Up here in front of you, you can see the cliffs. Now that is about halfway between the western end of Omaha Beach and the Pointe du Hoc itself. But we're going to drive along the next sort of mile and a half of the beach here. You can see exit Dog 3 running up here to your left-hand side. We're going to drive right the way down to the very far end of the beach. And we're going to drive up exit Dog 1.
That's where we come in. And I looked up there at them cliffs and I thought, God, how are they going to get up them cliffs? I don't know.
Yep.
I guess the bulldozer was in those for them.
No, they climbed those cliffs straight. Here at the western end of the beach, they didn't need them. They had the beach exits, which I'm going to show you in a little second.
They kept down this way, huh?
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't do that. I wasn't out sightseeing at the time.
No, well, this is what I try and tell people. When veterans write books and they swear blind they can remember every last thing, and I always say to them, I'm really sorry, but nobody was looking around on D-Day going, I must remember this to tell my grandchildren in 60 years' time.
Yeah, we was interested in getting unloaded and getting out of there.
Exactly. Exactly. You guys go forward and start letting the Germans shoot at you. We're going on.
Is this where you came in first or down?
No, the other place first. Yeah. This was the next day we brought British troops in. They didn't have to start their vehicles. We ended up having to start them and drive off. We didn't want to sit there over the cliffs. But then that next time it was on the other side of the cliffs when they got us.
Yeah, well,
the German still was there.
If you have a look at the very far westernmost point just there where the headline is sticking up, that's where the Germans had a resistance nest called WN-74. And that was occupied by the Germans right up until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon of June 7th. They were still able to shoot down on Omaha Beach. They're the guys who would have been shooting at you. Not the guys from Pointe du Hoc, but the next one down there. When I was in, about 3-4 months ago, I got a letter from this Navy museum in Florida that I'm going up to speak to next week. And it's this guy, and he makes pens out of historic wood. And he was looking for wood from D-Day. And so he said, could you give me anything? I said to him, I can give you ammunition boxes and stuff like that. But I said, if you're looking for wood to make pens out of, I said, the Germans sourced all their wood locally, and they used it to make the lattice work for their bunkers. And most of the trees around here are beech and oak and stuff like that. So I said, if you want to, I can whip up to one of the bunkers, I can rip out a whole bunch of the lattice work, and you can have that if you want. Because most of the bunkers are completely overgrown. Nobody cares about them at all. And so the guy said, oh yeah, that'll be brilliant. So I brought him off, and I went down to this bunker, and I got a whole lot of this wood, and I posted it off to him in America, and he started making these little pens, and it's got the name of the resistance nest in D-Day and Omaha Beach on it. So if you want to, you can get yourself one of these pens made out of wood, which came out of that bunker, and I can guarantee you it came out of that bunker, because I'm the one who went up there and pulled it all out. Nice to see her so interested.
Yeah.
Righty guys, without anybody getting themselves killed, please, I would like you to get out of the van just here on your right hand side, and I want you to cross over the road at this pedestrian crossing, and we're going to go and you're going to have a little walk on the beach.
We're way out there.
A beautiful beach.
There you are, Doug. And that's another thing when you land at the beach sometimes.
It's a good blast for you.
Now, say the water was high.
Come here and stop talking shite and listen to me. if you turn around,
My granny.
oops. Now, this here is exit dog 1 just here.
Yeah.
This bunker is just about here. This is one of the unloading keys coming in here on the beach from the Mulberry Harbour. And this one was coming in just down here about maybe 150 yards. And what you can't see in this picture is another one over here, which is coming in right where you're standing. Straight here behind you. I don't believe you. Well, there's a better picture. This is the guys actually bringing the stuff in. Because this is right here, Granny. I've seen these pictures
metal
before.
mesh down so they can drive on
Exactly,
it.
putting the metal mesh down. But this bit here is the end of the unloading queue, which comes ashore right here. You can see there's another one off to the side over there.
But
So
that
if you
was the
look at
first
it,
day, though.
no. This is the second day.
Yeah.
But if you have a look at this one here, this is June the 8th. By the time they got it all finished, this unloading queue is coming in about 300 yards down here. This one just here. This is exit dog 1 again, which is just here on the right hand side. This one is unloading pretty much right on this spot on the beach here in front of you, where we're looking at it at the moment.
Yeah.
But this is on the ocean side here, right? And that's
This is looking inland.
That's how flat that beach
That's
is.
how it's exactly how flat that beach is.
Yeah.
But here,
See, they towed the tanks over and made roads out of them.
you can hold on to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
If you have a look here, if you turn around again, Grandpa, you look behind you, just behind the red tractor there,
Yeah.
that's the last surviving intact piece of the American Mulberry Harbour. The 2 broken bits you were talking about,
Yeah, out there.
you can see the black crap sticking out of the ocean out there. There's a solid, unbroken line of them running 1.25 miles out to sea, 3 miles down the coast, tied in just below the American Cemetery, where you were visiting a little bit earlier on.
But I was there when we did some of that stuff down here.
They did it after the invasion.
They did it from June 6th,
After
7th,
the
and 8th.
invasion, that
Yeah.
was probably a week after the invasion.
Well, it was up and running by June 10th.
Was it that soon?
Mm-hmm.
But see, they towed them over, tugboats towed
Yep.
them over.
Yeah.
From England,
And,
right?
Of course, they might have started over when they started the invasion.
They left England the same time as the invasion. It
We
took
did, but
24 hours to tow one of those concrete caissons over to France.
It's like a big boxcar, only bigger.
Yeah, exactly, being towed, and not exactly the most seaworthy vessels in the world either.
No, it's just a hollow piece of cement.
Yeah.
And then they had a hole in the bottom they could open up, I suppose.
No, they had valves in the base of them. You could open the valves, and that would allow the water to come in.
I
And
never
close
got
them
on
again.
one, but
You didn't miss much.
no. But I watched them do it.
Yeah. You just look up and you go, what are these poor pricks doing?
Get up there. I didn't get down this far, see.
You didn't get down this far at all, no? You were below the cliffs up the top there.
Well, we just took them in and dumped them and got
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Went back out. We
Time to
didn't
get the
want
hell
mess
out of
around.
Dodge. No, I wouldn't blame you.
No.
Yeah. Behind this white house, you will see at the top of the cliffs twin German machine gun positions. One of them pointing up the beach exit, the other one pointing across the beach exit. These are rear-facing machine gun positions in case anybody is trying to attack this position from behind.
Where are they?
Right up there.
Right up there on your left, the top of the cliffs,
yes,
Granny.
now
Can't
I
miss
see
it.
them. Yes, I see them. Oh, wow.
All right, but have a look here on your right-hand side, and this is a section of the unloading quay from the Mulberry Harbour, which was set up here in June of 1944. Now, all they've got here now is 5 spans of the unloading quay. Would have originally been in spans up to 80 of these sections long, where it is now supported on concrete pillars. It would have originally been supported on floating steel pontoon barges, so the whole thing would rise and fall on the tide as it went in and out.
These guys drove these trucks, they waterproofed with spark plugs.
Yeah.
Sometimes they didn't get it done very good. So they didn't make it very good.
Oh, well, yeah, no, they
Indians.
Have a look here on your right. Some pretty impressive selections of German equipment here. You've got a German Flak 36 88mm anti-tank gun just there. You've also got some of the other guns which were on the ships offshore, just on the other side of the courtyard there of that little museum. Now we're going to drive along the coast a little bit more. We're going to be heading back up to Cherbourg. We'll probably be up there in about another 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so. You're going to be a little bit late back to the boat, but I was told you don't actually have to be back exactly at 3 o'clock, so I hope you don't mind too much.
We don't need to be there till 5:45.
Then it's too late.
Yeah.
Those ones over there are old as well. The garage is new.
No, we was busy. We didn't have time to come in and look at sightseeing. We can come in, dump them off, and go out and get another load, and bring them back in again. And then that storm come up, and we brought a load in, got them loaded off, and couldn't get them back out.
Not going any further.
I couldn't get turned around. I had one motor going forward and one going back, you know.
To try and spin the boat around.
And the wind, it caught us. Couldn't do nothing. I should have. If I'd been smart, I'd have dropped the anchor and rode it out. You know.
That's why you weren't an officer.
Well, our officer wouldn't
your
have
officer
figured that out either.
Your officer didn't think about that either, so don't worry about that too much.
Yeah, the officer wouldn't have figured that one out.
Most of them are only used for weddings and funerals. Only about 1 in 6 of them is in use on every Sunday.
On-site gravestone and all that.
Oh, it's all the Catholic Church.
Oh,
does
okay.
all that, yeah.
Still standing.
Right in front of you. This is roughly what you would have been looking at on the morning of June 6th as you were heading in towards the beach, but that is Utah Beach directly off in front of you there, slightly to your right-hand side.
It was the pivotal day of World War II, the most massive military operation in history. 160,000 Allied infantrymen converged on the beaches of Normandy to break through the impenetrable walls of German-held Fortress Europe. D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944. Walter Martinez, a sergeant in the 2nd Ranger Battalion, was among those in the first wave to hit the beaches. 14 German divisions were waiting for them on the battlefront. In 1942, an armada of American and British warships heads for North Africa to make the first Allied amphibious landing of World War II. pushing back the Axis powers, the Allies now have their first foothold on foreign soil. From the moment when the Allied armies begin pushing back the German army, the ultimate goal has been to invade France. To do so, the Allies need to break through Hitler's formidable seawall. For 4 years, he has been building this barrier of concrete, steel, and artillery all along the Atlantic coast of France. September 1943, the American 1st Division, the Big Red One, lands at Liverpool. Veterans of landings in Africa and Sicily, they joined the 1,500,000 Americans gathering in England for the invasion of Europe. Among them is 22-year-old Walter Martinez with the 2nd Ranger Battalion.
They broke our outfits up, and when we went there to England, we were what you call like replacement, repa depots. And when we got there, we were filling in different outfits, you know, to bring him up to strength, because some of these outfits, particularly mine, they had fought in Anzio and Salerno. So in England, they came around to the repa depots looking for us, brand new from the state, even though some of us had 2 and 3 years to fill in these outfits, but the Ranger outfit was strictly a volunteer. Rangers as a whole, they spearhead for outfits. Spearhead means that you have to break through.
To prepare Operation Overlord, as Churchill has named the invasion, 16 million tons of weaponry will have arrived in New England by invasion time. Meanwhile, Allied troops are subjected to the most rigorous training they have ever known.
I was trained real hard. We learned how to jump, using all kinds of TNT dynamite to blow up for railroad tracks behind the lines, and most anything that had to do with combat, we were pretty well trained. The rifles and guns like that, we knew pretty well, but just tactics. As a matter of fact, the British liaison, they used to say, you guys trained harder than the war it actually is, and some of these guys knew because they had fought in North Africa. The people who trained me were Rangers, and sometimes I wonder if I was more afraid of them than I was of the Germans, because these guys were really tough and rugged. We had boxing tournaments within the battalions and division regimentals, and if you boxed, they give you 3 days off in London so you can cure your wounds.
Across the English Channel, the Germans continue to fortify their strength. Since its conception, the Atlantic Wall has been Hitler's obsession. Thousands of laborers have worked to forge its guns, machine gun bunkers, and concrete obstacles, which have made it into a fearsome barricade. The wall would even be stronger if Germany's commander-in-chief in the West, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, believed in it as much as Hitler. With 2,000 miles of coastline to defend, von Rundstedt believes that an army can't cover every inch equally. Assuming the initial Allied landing is successful, von Rundstedt plans to move his powerful reserve forces to that location and drive the invasion army back into the sea. Hitler's decorated Field Marshal Erwin Rommel is ordered to France in late 1943 to conduct an inspection tour of the Atlantic defenses. Rommel concludes that the success of Rundstedt's defense depends on air cover. However, the beleaguered Luftwaffe can no longer guarantee that, so he urges drastic revisions. In January 1944, Rommel is given principal responsibility for the coast defense. Convinced that the invasion team must be destroyed before it ever gets across the beaches, Rommel orders every gap in the wall closed. The high water line, he says, must be the main fighting line. Rommel sets about fortifying the approaches. He orders the construction of submerged obstacles, concrete protrusions, spikes, and mines to slow the landing. On the beaches, the artillery is roofed and walled with concrete, laced together with miles of barbed wire. 4 million landmines are buried in the Normandy sand. For the next 7 miles back, every open area is flooded or planted with obstacles to frustrate any airborne landing. Every available soldier, from baker to clerk, is called into service. The first 24 hours of the landing will be decisive. Even with troop strength depleted by the demands of the Russian front and the Allied landings at Anzio, 14 German divisions are lined up and waiting by the middle of May. One of them is the Panzer Lehr that is brought in from Hungary.
Well, the Panzer Lehr was one of the crack divisions of the German army, and it had been brought to Normandy almost at full strength. They only had 2 weeks to prepare for the fighting in Normandy, but the Panzer Lehr was in good shape. It had armaments, it had Tiger tanks, it had personnel, and it was, in fact, perhaps the best fighting division in the German army.
The actual deployment of the Panzer Lehr at Normandy creates a division in the German High Command.
The great debate in the German defenses was between Rundstedt and Rommel. And Rundstedt believed that to stop the invasion, you would have to allow the troops to get ashore, and then, when they were ashore but could not get out of the pocket, hit them with everything you had. In other words, to allow the landings to occur and then hit the troops once they were ashore. Rommel, on the other hand, felt that the only way to stop the invasion was to hit the troops on the beaches before they could get ashore.
It was the pivotal day of World War II, the most massive military operation in history. 160,000 Allied infantrymen converged on the beaches of Normandy to break through the impenetrable walls of German-held Fortress Europe. D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944. Walter Martinez, a sergeant in the 2nd Ranger Battalion, was among those in the first wave to hit the beaches. 14 German divisions were waiting for them on the battlefront. In 1942, an armada of American and British warships heads for North Africa to make the first Allied amphibious landing of World War II. Pushing back the Axis powers, the Allies now have their first foothold on foreign soil. From the moment when the Allied armies begin pushing back the German army, the ultimate goal has been to invade France. To do so, the Allies need to break through Hitler's formidable seawall. For 4 years, he has been building this barrier of concrete, steel, and artillery all along the Atlantic coast of France. September 1943, the American 1st Division, the Big Red One, lands at Liverpool. Veterans of landings in Africa and Sicily, they join the 1,500,000 Americans gathering in England for the invasion of Europe. Among them is 22-year-old Walter Martinez with the 2nd Ranger Battalion.
They broke our outfits up, and when we went there to England, we were what you call like replacement, repa depots. And when we got there, we were filling in different outfits, you know, to bring him up to strength, because some of these outfits, particularly mine, they had fought in Anzio and Salerno. So in England, they came around to the repa depots looking for us, brand new from the state, even though some of us had 2 and 3 years to fill in these outfits, but the Ranger outfit was strictly a volunteer. Rangers as a whole, they spearhead for outfits. Spearhead means that you have to break through.
To prepare Operation Overlord, as Churchill has named the invasion, 16 million tons of weaponry will have arrived in New England by invasion time. Meanwhile, Allied troops are subjected to the most rigorous training they have ever known.
I was trained real hard. We learned how to jump, using all kinds of TNT dynamite to blow up for railroad tracks behind the lines, and most anything that had to do with combat, we were pretty well trained. The rifles and guns like that, we knew pretty well, but just tactics. As a matter of fact, the British liaison, they used to say, you guys trained harder than the war it actually is, and some of these guys knew because they had fought in North Africa. The people who trained me were Rangers, and sometimes I wonder if I was more afraid of them than I was of the Germans, because these guys were really tough and rugged. We had boxing tournaments within the battalions and division regimentals, and if you boxed, they give you 3 days off in London so you can cure your wounds.
Across the English Channel, the Germans continue to fortify their strength. Since its conception, the Atlantic Wall has been Hitler's obsession. Thousands of laborers have worked to forge its guns, machine gun bunkers, and concrete obstacles, which have made it into a fearsome barricade. The wall would even be stronger if Germany's commander-in-chief in the West, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, believed in it as much as Hitler. With 2,000 miles of coastline to defend, von Rundstedt believes that an army can't cover every inch equally. Assuming the initial Allied landing is successful, von Rundstedt plans to move his powerful reserve forces to that location and drive the invasion army back into the sea. Hitler's decorated Field Marshal Erwin Rommel is ordered to France in late 1943 to conduct an inspection tour of the Atlantic defenses. Rommel concludes that the success of Rundstedt's defense depends on air cover. However, the beleaguered Luftwaffe can no longer guarantee that, so he urges drastic revisions. In January 1944, Rommel is given principal responsibility for the coast defense. Convinced that the invasion team must be destroyed before it ever gets across the beaches, Rommel orders every gap in the wall closed. The high water line, he says, must be the main fighting line. Rommel sets about fortifying the approaches. He orders the construction of submerged obstacles, concrete protrusions, spikes, and mines to slow the landing. On the beaches, the artillery is roofed and walled with concrete, laced together with miles of barbed wire. 4 million landmines are buried in the Normandy sand. For the next 7 miles back, every open area is flooded or planted with obstacles to frustrate any airborne landing. Every available soldier, from baker to clerk, is called into service. The first 24 hours of the landing will be decisive. Even with troop strength depleted by the demands of the Russian front and the Allied landings at Anzio, 14 German divisions are lined up and waiting by the middle of May. One of them is the Panzer Lehr that is brought in from Hungary.
Well, the Panzer Lehr was one of the crack divisions of the German army, and it had been brought to Normandy almost at full strength. They only had 2 weeks to prepare for the fighting in Normandy, but the Panzer Lehr was in good shape. It had armaments, it had Tiger tanks, it had personnel, and it was, in fact, perhaps the best fighting division in the German army.
The actual deployment of the Panzer Lehr at Normandy creates a division in the German High Command.
The great debate in the German defenses was between Rundstedt and Rommel. And Rundstedt believed that to stop the invasion, you would have to allow the troops to get ashore, and then, when they were ashore but could not get out of the pocket, hit them with everything you had. In other words, to allow the landings to occur and then hit the troops once they were ashore. Rommel, on the other hand, felt that the only way to stop the invasion was to hit the troops on the beaches before they could get ashore.
To boost morale, General Dwight D. Eisenhower visits the troops in England.
Whenever you saw somebody of high brass come near the battle area, it was impressive, and we always found him to be a well-spoken guy. He didn't look as rough to us as the man who he really was when he had to make that faithful decision, you know, D-Day.
To keep the Germans confused about the invasion point, the Allies staged numerous probing maneuvers up and down the French coast. At dawn, June 1st, the morning is gray and dull. It also marks the beginning of the worst weather in 30 years. Bad news for the Allies. The invasion is dependent on the tide for troop landings, moonlight for the airborne, and calm seas. The simultaneous beginning of a new Russian offensive designed to preoccupy the Germans has been set. All this planning depends on the weather. The odds are against the Allies from the start. The British are assigned to 2 beaches, codenamed Gold and Sword. The Canadians are assigned to one named Juno. The Americans get 2 named Omaha and Utah. These 5 beaches of Normandy form an 80-mile strip along the Atlantic Wall. Finally, on the morning of June 5th, after already calling the ships back once because of bad weather, General Eisenhower makes the agonizing decision to go, and the greatest invasion in history is underway. The Allied probing maneuvers have created confusion within German intelligence.
The Allies had carefully planted phony information for a year before the invasion. They had been bombing the Pas-de-Calais regularly, and that's the shortest route across the Channel. The Normandy route is considerably longer.
The weather odds are also analyzed by Field Marshal Rommel. On June 5th, he leaves his headquarters to go home for his wife's birthday, convinced the Allies will never land in bad weather. But Allied forces are preparing to deliver Rommel a surprise. June 6, 1944. The seas in the Channel are typically rough as the armada of 5,300 ships move toward an obstacle that separates Europe from its liberation. Overhead, thousands of fighter planes. Also, hundreds of troop transports and gliders carrying the paratroop vanguard of the invasion. conditions are not ideal for the invasion. The waves are high and the clouds are threatening. But the loading of the convoys goes on following General Eisenhower's orders.
At that time, we had no emotion, no feeling. We just were so tense in the job that was before us that about any order he gave, we would have followed.
What the Germans saw was a sight that had never been seen before and will never be seen again. An invasion of such dimensions as to be almost incredible. The sea was full of ships. The first question was, is this the real invasion? The men who were on the beaches who saw those 5,000 ships knew very well that this was the real invasion. But the intelligence reports back in Berlin left the question as to whether this was the real thing. Always the question in Hitler's mind and the minds of the other commanders, was this the real thing, or was this just to draw the panzers away from the Pas-de-Calais where the real invasion would follow?
Loaded with 32 men each, the landing craft start their run for the beach.
You have a lot of thoughts. What bothered me the most was that we were so jammed, and a lot of guys got seasick, so we had to walk through the mess. Let me put it this way, it was very uncomfortable. The motion sickness was actually taking its toll. Guys were ready to swim in if they had to.
It was an armada, the greatest armada ever put together in the history of the world. And when the Germans saw it, they could only marvel at it, and they knew that the war was over. There's a marvelous comment in Cornelius Ryan's book on D-Day, in which one of the German officers who survived said later, when I saw that, I knew it was the end for Germany.
For the 8 companies of men approaching Omaha Beach, the nightmarish obstacles Rommel has planted begin to pay off for the Germans. Here the struggle is the fiercest. Omaha Beach is 6 miles of hell, with 100-foot cliffs at either end.
The outfits like the Big Red One and the 29th that hit the beach, they got a chance to see the silhouette and the pillboxes. There were particularly one giant pillbox. There was a little bit of everything. There was a little bit of confusion. There is a little fear there, but you don't recognize it. I think the confusion overwhelms in the commotion and the confusion. And you don't function like a human being, you function more like a machine.
Amid sinking tanks and exploding landing craft, raked by relentless machine gun fire, many of the men are mowed down before they even hit the sand.
The Germans were so completely outnumbered and had no air support whatsoever. Complete control of the air for the Allies. I think there was something like 2 German planes in the air that day. So that the Germans really didn't have a chance. And they knew it.
While landing at Omaha Beach turns into disaster, Utah Beach is nearly the opposite. The U.S. 4th Division lands there with little resistance and moves rapidly inland. At Juno Beach, the high seas and German defenses are frustrating the Canadians. The sandy strip is marked with the dead and dying of both sides. Sword Beach is small, but because it is a naval port, it is guarded by heavy gun emplacements. Weather and terrain take many casualties from the British first wave. At Gold Beach, amphibious tanks are vital in wiping out enemy gun emplacements. The men are not fighting alone. 10,000 flights of aircraft battered German defenses with more than 11,000 tons of bombs. Of all the beaches, Omaha is where the battle is fiercest and results in the most casualties.
That was the hard area there where they cut railroad tracks and they buried them in an angle, so when our gliders went in there, they took a tremendous toll of our people. It was a hell of a stench. Gunfire, a lot of wreckage on the beach, a lot of bodies.
German air strength had been moved out of Normandy just a few days before. They had been pulled back for rest, recreation, and repair, so that the German fighting strength was less than it would have been even a few days before.
In my case, I was in Punta Hack. What I saw was rugged rocks, which we hit a lot. We fired hooks to climb up on ropes to go up to the top. But we were supposed to knock out some heavy German artillery pieces up on top of that hill. When we got up there wasn't any. They had already moved them out. When we got up there, a lot of snipers. They were retreating. Evidently, that was the last of the working crew, wherever they moved those guns that they had.
Also, there was another factor on D-Day. Rommel was not present to command the German troops on the beaches. And also, the panzers were held back for 10 hours because Hitler couldn't make the decision to commit them.
With troops moving inland everywhere, it is apparent that the Allies' gamble has paid off. Although nobody knows the exact figure, approximately 160,000 men are ashore by the end of D-Day. The beachhead is secure.
It was really, say, well, what I went through, and I'm here. You know, it's a weird feeling that's very hard to explain. I'm here.
The invasion of Normandy would signal the death knell for German domination of Europe. For that prize, nearly 4,000 men would give their lives on Omaha Beach alone. By day's end, Germans are surrendering or in retreat. Their Reich is beginning to crumble. Looking back on the beachhead, soldiers will remember this landing as the longest day.